So back into this, I had mentioned in the previous video that this was not the actual problem. I had replaced the rocker arm and the push rod, and there was still a loud knocking, and then I showed a video of it running okay. So at that point, I basically was totally solid on that it was the lifter, and there was nothing really else to do other than start taking things apart and really investigating it. So in this video, I end up taking out everything I need to-ish to get to the actual lifter, and we'll go through that process now. Okay, so we got the intake snail thing off there. So the intake manifold is relatively clear. Took all the injector lines off, and the valve covers are still off. And we're just going to go ahead. I already zipped off a couple of these intake manifold bolts here. This side's completely done. I'm working on the other side now. I'm hoping that I can get underneath the turbo without having to actually pull it off completely, because there are some bolts on that thing that are basically impossible to remove. So I'm going to try to zip all those off as best as I can, and then really see if I can kind of squish that on out of there. We'll see. Okay, so that took forever. What I ended up having to do was take the outer snail portion of the turbo off, the actual compressor portion of it, because it was preventing the intake from kind of clearing all of this stuff. To be honest though, if I had thought ahead and I just removed the injection pump from the get-go, I don't think I would have had to have split that. So kind of my fault probably. Your mileage may vary, but I did have to remove it in my case to get that out of the way. And it added a lot of room anyway, so whatever. The valley pan is still in there. I need to figure out what all I need to pull in order to get the valley pan out. Just another FYI, in case you never knew this. This turbo, the oil return on it appears to be this weird arm thing right here that kind of mates up to the bottom of it, and then it's just gravity fed on down with that snout into that hole into the gravity pan right there. So into the valley pan, it's gravity fed. So you have to kind of finagle that thing out of there while you're working on it. All in all, an absolute pain in the butt. Oh, so there is one other thing. I didn't want to have to pull the back half of the turbo because it's such a pain to get to. I mean, you can just not get back there. So what I ended up doing to get to that bolt back there on the intake manifold is I used the smaller ratchet. I think it's called a 1/4 inch ratchet. I forget right now. I'm tired. I'm sorry. I used this 1/4 inch ratchet with this long extension and a knuckle and this 9/16. All of the ones that go around the intake manifold, in my case, were 9/16. So I put this on there and I kind of reached behind the turbo and I was able to get it on there. And it actually came off easier than some of the other ones just because of the angle and the way I was able to use the ratchet. So there is a way to finagle that one out. Don't give up. Just go between the two exhaust ports there, the intake and the outtake of that exhaust, and you should be able to get that off there. All right. So the injection pump is out, as you can see. It was relatively easy to do, actually. You pull up this little cover and you take the 3 bolts out behind it. You have to use a 12-tooth socket. You cannot do anything else. Like, if you try to do something else, you're just going to strip those nuts. So, or bolts. So, there's also 3 bolts on this side of it, or 3 nuts on this side of it, and washers. Don't let those washers fall down inside of there, because you will have to really take stuff apart to get them out. So maybe even have a magnet there to avoid that. So I got those 3 off, pulled the injection pump out, and our valley pan is pretty much free and clear. So I have some retention flanges and bolts to take out, and then you should have a little clip here of the whole thing coming out. And I have a plan to have you guys watch that moment with me. Okay, here we go. Alright, it's totally loose. Let's see what's going on underneath this thing. Perhaps, if I can do this one-handed. Alright, here we go. And bye-bye. Yep, valve stuff. I don't know what it means either. Let's get a light in on here. Alright, there it is. That lifter exploded, kind of, it looks like. Just totally kind of popped right on out of there. So, guess I need to do probably just replace all of them, eh? That's probably the wise thing to do. So we'll probably take the rest of these out, put a new one on in there. Cool. Well, I think that's going to summarize this little video. So I will probably follow up after I get the parts and see what we can do about putting this back together. Thanks for watching. After getting the valley pan all opened up here, I was able to pull out this little wrench-shaped retainer here. It actually just kind of holds all this stuff in place and keeps these lifters in place here. So after pulling, there was this pan out, this guy held in by these 3 bolts. After pulling that out, you have the ability to remove these. They're not held in by anything but the tension of that little plate in there. And then you can pop these lifters right on out of there. So this one's actually okay, so I'm going to put it on back there. So what I ended up failing on this one here was the retention clip. So I went ahead and I got some compressed air and I blew out all of these lifters here so that way I can see the retention clip and kind of visually inspected all of them and make sure that everything looks good before I put all this back together. So here is the lifter actually outside of the engine. That is the entire kind of like lifter body. This is the cup that I believe adjusts based on the amount of oil pressure you have, and it kind of makes it so the valve adjusts based on general wear. And this is kind of the little cup that the actual push rod sits in. So the major components of this are actually completely intact. The spring that sits on the internals of this is actually intact, as well as this bearing is totally intact, and it feels actually quite good, and it's worn very evenly. So that should mean that my cam is totally okay. But I just thought it was very interesting. Essentially, the retention clip came out of this, and it just disassembled along the ride, and the push rod ended up sitting inside of this for some time, and then the moment I removed all this and took the push rod out, this fella just kind of popped on out of there. So this is all a very good sign. It is a good indicator that there is no extreme or extensive wear or metallic damage on any of the major engine components inside of the car. So very excited to get the new one in there and see what happens next.